President Trump will hold a White House briefing on border security for top Republicans and Democrats later today. He's still pushing Congress to approve billions of dollars for a border wall as part of any deal. But despite the president's hard-line stance on immigration, recent CBS News polling finds the GOP's position among Latinos has not weakened throughout the Trump administration. In fact, almost a third of the bloc say they voted Republican House candidates in November's midterm elections. Earlier, my colleague Anne-Marie and I spoke to CBS News contributor and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez about this.
All right, so let's talk about this because these numbers are really surprising to me, Leslie. So in 2016, during the presidential election, 27% of Latinos voted for candidate Donald Trump. 2 years later, his approval rating is 32%. Among the same voting bloc. I think that would surprise a lot of people because he's losing support in other areas where he had support. He's actually gaining in the Latino community. Explain these numbers.
Sure. There's a very strong base of Republican Latinos that support the party platform. And what they do like about President Trump is the strong border security. As much as you're hearing about immigration, the opposite end of that is ensuring that the borders are safe on any compromised port of entry, land, air, sea, whatever that may be. And a lot of these are veterans. People come from law enforcement backgrounds or people that live in the Southwest or particularly that Sun Belt. That is a particularly important area because it's close and has proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border. You also see the rise of evangelical Christians, evangelical and charismatic Catholics who feel that this is a party that protects religious liberties. So a lot of that overlay, Anne-Marie, is a base of ideas that they believe the Republican Party represents, and he is the champion and the leader of the party.
Leslie, you make a great point. I mean, the reality is, although folks in the media, folks on the opinion side of things get riled up by the president's tweets and some of the things that he says, his policies are generally in line with Republican policies. You could see a President Cruz or President Rubio doing very much similarly to what this president has done. Now, according to recent CBS News polling, 38% of Americans, as we talked about, favor building a wall along that U.S.-Mexico border, but a majority, 59%, oppose it. How big of an issue is this for Latino voters? I mean, I know we understand that the policies and the evangelical support is there, but what about this wall?
You know, immigration has never been the top issue for Latino voters. It's usually the economy and health care. But immigration is the lens by which they view the party. When you dehumanize individuals, particularly immigrants, it does have a backlash effect. And Vlad, look at states like California with larger immigrant populations, Colorado, New Mexico, that lost every major Republican battle in 2018, particularly because of the rise of this Hispanic voter that is moving from a Republican base to an unaffiliated one. So that's really the trend that you're talking about. And toxic language, particularly related to Latino or Mexicans or the caravan, using those as political props, will have a really dramatic effect, especially along that southwest border.
So that's why what happened in Florida during the midterm elections is so interesting to me, right? A record number of Latinos voted in this year's midterm elections. But in Florida, Democrats, they were not able to convince the state's often right-leaning Cuban American voters to support their candidates. I mean, if Latinos are moving away from the Republican Party because of this immigration debate, what gives? Why can't Democrats pick them up? And what does this tell you about 2020?
You know, I always say Florida is a microcosm of the United States. It has such a diverse culture, such a diverse economy, but it's very different politically. You have a lot of individuals, whether they be Cuban American or Puerto Ricans, larger populations. You have Venezuelans, Latin Americans, who come for political freedom versus economic freedom, which is what you see in the other parts of the country. So it's not an area that has large Mexican American populations that dominate politics. It's very different. And for that reason, this kind of strong base of Cuban American support is still consistent. But Anne-Marie and Vlad, the biggest thing to take away from this is demography is destiny. And we say it over and over again, especially when we're talking to the Republican Party. As these millennials, which is now voting age, are growing and becoming a bigger part of the electorate, are moving away from the Republican Party into unaffiliated, and they're increasingly diverse, they're going to be a jump ball in elections. And that's what both parties are really struggling with because because they've disrupted everything from retail to automotive to housing. They're disrupting politics. And that's why we all have to pay attention. They're not going to vote for their dad's party, their mom's party. They're going to vote on their own interest, and they're listening to the tone of this president.
So, Leslie, it's really interesting, the research that you've done here and in your book, because, and I know this is going to be a little specific, but we can do that on CBSN. You might not be able to do that and other platforms. And this is
we love that, Vlad.
Yeah, no,
you're a historian. You're a historian.
I am.
like that.
So what I really find fascinating is like how you broke it out with Cuban Americans that are specifically, we know Cuban Americans have been politically active in this country for many, many years. And when we talk about the Latino vote, I sometimes wonder if we are over compensating for the Cuban American community, as opposed to, for example, here in New York City, where we have a lot of Dominicans, we have a lot of people from Ecuador, El Salvador, and they are not right-leaning. They are not supporters generally of some of the policies the president has put through, but they are not necessarily politically active. In other words, they have not been organized politically in the way that the Latinos, which are predominantly Cuban American in Florida, for example, have been going back to the early 1960s.
Exactly right, Vlad. And many Cuban Americans came with their education. They were successful business owners, landowners when they left Cuba, and they have a very different experience. They were very entrepreneurial. They're part of the vibrant economy that is continued to be maintained in Florida. So they are the bedrock of those values and that economy, which is very, very different from the rest of the country. If you look at the map of Latino, over 60% of them are of Mexican American descent versus about 4 to 5% that are Cuban. Of Cuban descent. So yes, we like to paint these broad brushstrokes, but it's geopolitical. It's based on ethnicity, acculturation, how long they've been in this country, are they an immigrant, a new immigrant? All of those factors are making a case, and it's also, are you seeing Latinos growing up, you know, from a child in very red, traditionally red Republican states like I did, which plays a very big part on kind of how they see the world and in terms of their value system. So all of those are factors, but they're very young, and they're not going to follow traditional patterns. That's what's changing.
Leslie, I just wanted to sort of ask you one more question, jumping off from what Vlad pointed out about, you know, here in New York, you have a lot of Hispanics, a lot of Dominicans, don't necessarily vote, though. And I'm wondering your opinion, Leslie, are the two parties, Republican or Democrats, are they doing enough to reach out to the Latino communities?
Not at all. And I think there's arguments on both sides of the aisle. If you look up in the Northeast, there should be a larger wave. We've been talking about the sleeping giant of you know, Hispanics coming out to vote and really change elections. We've been talking about that for over 20 years. But it is a big step to go from socialization to politicalization to mobilization. Those are big arcs to accomplish. If you think of the African American community, by comparison, it took almost 30 years. With that said, it's starting to happen. And I think you're seeing new technology on the Republican and on the Democratic side to appeal to them. But it is message, it is value, and it is candidates. Both parties are deficient in finding the right types of candidates that they support early on. If you look at the ones who won in 2018, they defied the party norms because they went outside the system and raised their money, mostly through social media. The parties are late to catch up. Industry that's late to catch up is basically gone extinct. You could say the same thing about these parties.
All right, Leslie.
Really fascinating.
Yeah, it's always a great discussion with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Come to New York, Leslie. We miss you.
You got it.